Hi, I'm Miranda.
I'm Mel.
And today we are going to be talking about the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
In relation to the Trans Archives lecture that we had with Dr. Aaron DeVore.
And his contributions and his help in creating the transgendered archives. One in particular that we found interesting was a box of fawns that was in reference to a legal case between the group Rape Relief and the individual Barbara Findlay. We were flipping through this and reading in on all the different transcriptions from the case and all the different case studies, the different case studies that were included in these archives. We found one that was called the Transgendered Law Reform Project, which was sponsored by the Law Foundation of BC, and within that, it detailed the
different ways to kind of go about talking about transgendered identities and law.
And within that, we sort of found this section that discussed how the DSM included at the time homosexual people and transgender people, and now still includes transgendered individuals.
As Miranda was saying, we found it interesting, the subject matter of classifications for gender identity disorder in the DSM. After talking with Dr. Aaron, the issues arise around the certain language used in the DSM, as well as why there is still a need for the DSM classifying gender identity disorder, and also the problematic language that's used within it. So the issues around that are that you need the DSM criteria so that transitioning persons can receive coverage through healthcare in order to get their treatments processed in like a normal time frame and have the proper coverage. Also at the same time, there's a lot of problematic language used in the DSM. Using gender identity disorder was actually taken out, and they changed it to gender incongruence, just because the two titles in itself like create a lot of stigma for people with transgendered identity. So what we're going to do is kind of go over the pros and cons of having the DSM
or having transgendered
as having the criteria in the DSM, and kind of outline what we believe are the pros and the cons of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to go over the pros. For the pros, as previously mentioned, transitioning is a very big thing for anyone to have to overcome or, go through. And with that being said, there's a lot of financial issues as well. It, costs money to get hormone treatments. It costs money to actually go in and get plastic surgeries to get, the physical changes made that need to be made. And one of the only ways to get that done is to have the DSM classify transgendered people get legitimate healthcare coverage, and they can continue to receive the treatment in order to feel comfortable and to get to a place where they're happy with themselves.
And so I kind of was thinking the cons of this is the language, like, is mainly what I'm going to talk about. Using gender identity disorder in itself implies that you have a mental disorder because of the way that you feel, and you feel that you don't obtain to the certain gender construct that you were born in. It just further stigmatizes the trans community, labeling gender identity disorder as a mental disease or disorder. Classifying gender variants kind of perpetuates the stigma. For example, the DSM-3, which there's been various versions of the DSM. So the DSM-3 actually was a huge step because they took out homosexuality as a mental disorder. Since then, the DSM-4 revised had gender identity disorder, but they revised it to gender incongruence. It's a big step in changing the name. The issue with calling it gender incongruence, though, is it still implies that congruence is the norm. And incongruence, like, as the definition itself, is problematic in labeling someone as, like, incongruent, like you're not the same as everybody else. So the World Professional Association for Transgendered Health Recommendations has written articles talking about the progress the DSM has made in changing gender identity disorder to gender incongruence, which now they want changed to gender dysphoria. Reasons for this is because it reflects the diagnosis says it should only be applicable to some transgendered individuals who feel like they really experience like significant distress related to being a transgendered person, rather than actually having all transgendered people as having a clinical like disorder, which isn't the case. So that's a big step that WPATH has taken, and their research is definitely very fundamental in working to change classifications like the DSM that really generalize and it's just very generalized in classifying how people should fit into a certain criteria when that's not always the case. Having like certain other things that are related to physical health and mental health that aren't necessarily classified all the time, you can still get treatment for it. So if you want to get a corrective surgery, to have plastic surgery, you don't need to go through a whole process of being diagnosed with a disorder. Rather than it's just the fact that you want to get this done, you pay for it, you can go get it done. Whereas here, if you want some coverage for healthcare and you are a transgendered person wanting to transition, you have to go through the whole process of being diagnosed, being labeled. Yeah, and being stigmatized as a person who's different from society, and you become further marginalized. And I don't think that should be
an unnecessary step.
Yeah, very unnecessary. It exemplifies the constraints that they face in society.
Yeah. So, with that being said, we'd like to acknowledge that, this is a tough subject for anyone to have to sort of battle with in terms of, proper terminology and, trying to make transgender people feel as comfortable as possible with, these different labels. However, we also note that it is extremely difficult for anyone really, to go through anything without having the benefit of healthcare taking some of the financial burden off of one's shoulders.
Definitely.
That pretty much sums it up. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.